Good morning and welcome to the church at Rancho Bernardo. Thanks for joining us online. My name is DJ. We are so excited to sing with y'all, so would you worship with us together?
Weakness is a canvas for your strength. And my story isn't over, my story's just begun. Failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Lay your burdens down here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. You're in the Father's house. Rival's not the end game, the journey's where you are. Never wanted perfect, you just wanted more. And the story isn't over if the story isn't good. Failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Lay your burdens down here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. You're in the Father's house.
Sing this out with some prodigals.
Prodigals come home, the helpless find hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors swing wide, the dead come to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Miracles take place, the cynical find faith. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Jericho walls are quaking, strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. And love is breaking through when the Father's in the room.
Well, hey, everybody. These are certainly unprecedented days in the life of our nation. These are certainly uncertain times. These are certainly unique moments in the life of our church. But with that, this is a unique opportunity for us as a church. Right now, this is a pretty cool reality. There are hundreds of homes, thousands of people. Although we are not gathered here as a large gathering, we are gathered all across this city. And we are practicing what our government and our public healthcare officials have asked us to do, and that is to be socially distant. But at the same time, we believe it's possible as a church to practice what the scriptures have invited us to do over and over again and what we do every week. Even though we can't be in a large gathering today, we can be spiritually connected. And so what we're going to do today, we're going to have some church and we're going to practice being socially distant and we're going to practice being spiritually connected at the same time. So whether or not you're watching by yourself on a laptop with your AirPods in, whether you're here in this room, whether you're gathered with your small group today, we're going to have some church, and that's the good news. I'm not a public healthcare official. I am not a politician. I'm going to stay in my lane today. And there's a lot that is uncertain in our culture and in our world. But one thing that is certain is that in 28 days, the world is going to do what it has done for the last 2,000 years, and that's celebrate Easter. That we know for sure. The world for 2,000 years has celebrated that the resurrection of Jesus took place. That's the turning point of history. And so what I want to do today, all across the city, is for us as a church to begin to shift our eyes to what we know for certain, and that's resurrection. That's Easter. And in the next 28 days as a church, we're going to begin a brand new series today where we begin to really shift towards that critical event in Jerusalem that changed history forever. If you're just joining us, or maybe you've never actually been to this physical location, we're really glad you're tuning in with us today. Here's what we believe as a church. We believe that Easter is a miracle. Easter's a miracle. And when we say that, obviously we believe in the physical event of Easter taking place, but we don't just, believe that it's a fable. We don't just believe, or we don't believe that it's a fable. We don't believe that it's, something that Disney kind of cooked up, or we don't dismiss the Easter story or resurrection and kind of move to the teachings of Jesus and say, who really knows about resurrection? At the end of the day, it's the Sermon on the Mount, or it's the teachings of Jesus that are just a good ethic and we should live that way. We believe that if Easter falls apart, everything falls apart. Easter is the whole thing. Everything about our faith hinges on and revolves around the resurrection of Jesus. 2,000 years ago, Jesus walked out of a tomb in Nazareth, or in Jerusalem, and defeated death once and for all. And you probably believe that today. You probably have heard that at some point, but we believe that as a church. That's what we hinge the whole thing around. But here's kind of the cool part. We don't just believe Easter is a miracle. We believe Easter means you are a miracle. You're a miracle. And you go, no, I'm not. I'm Frank. I'm John. I can't even find my locker at school. I am 14. I don't even have a driver's license. I'm trying to figure my life out. I don't feel like a miracle. And maybe you understand that in biological terms. I mean, we all kind of get that. You're a miracle. You can see, you can hear, you can, process information. Synapses are firing in your brain. But what the scriptures teach is that what's true in the biological realm is true in the spiritual realm. You are a miracle spiritually, which right there you are thinking, what in the world are you talking about? Here's what I mean. Let me try to explain it this way. Easter declares that you are a miracle because, this is incredible. You are the divine resting place of God. God has chosen to take up residence in you. All throughout the scriptures, God has chosen a place on earth where he is going to take up residence. If you read the book of Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, that story. The place where God has chosen to take up residence is in the Garden of Eden. If you read the rest of the Old Testament, Exodus through Malachi, the other 38 books, it's a temple in Jerusalem, or in the Exodus period, they're wandering in the wilderness, but the temple is the divine resting place of God. And here's what the New Testament declares. This is so incredible that you and I, through Easter, through the miracle of Easter, Easter's not just a miracle. It means you're a miracle because of the resurrection of Jesus, you are the place where heaven meets earth. You are the place going to work, picking up your kids, having conversations with your husband, hanging out with your roommates. You are the divine resting place of God. You are a miracle. And that sounds kind of lofty and esoteric. And, what in the world, does that even mean? How do we live that way? Well, here's the good news. And this is what we're going to do together over the next few weeks. In the Sermon on the Mount, and if you're new to church, that's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Jesus tells you how to live this miraculous kind of life and this miraculous reality of being the divine resting place of God. In fact, there's probably not more practical teaching that Jesus gives on what he wants you to do and what he wants me to do as these sort of portable temples going throughout this world than he shares or what he describes at the Sermon on the Mount. And another way to explain this, the primary metaphor that Jesus gives for himself in the New Testament is that he's a king. And that's kind of an odd metaphor for us because we don't live in a world of kings and queens, at least not in the United States. That's kind of a England thing or a world that doesn't exist anymore. We don't think of kings and queens in the United States. We have presidents or senators. But that image in the first century world was the image, the dominant image that everybody understood. Everybody understood kings and queens. And so Jesus' message over and over again is, I am a king, and I have come into this world to bring a kingdom. It's a kingdom that he's coming to bring. And if you were to ask Jesus 2,000 years ago, what are you here to do? He wouldn't say, well, I'm here to make sure that when you die, you can go to heaven. That's kind of our 21st century answer for why Jesus came. But his answer was, I am a king who has come to bring a kingdom. In fact, he says it more than he says anything else. My kingdom is at hand. My kingdom is near. That is the central message that Jesus brings in the Gospels. And this kingdom that he's describing over and over again, people didn't understand it in the first century world. We get kind of confused when we read about it in the 21st century world. But this kingdom is a kingdom that is counterintuitive to the value system of our culture and the value system of our world. The kingdom of Jesus does not operate according to greed. It operates according to generosity. The kingdom of Jesus is a kingdom where when you get angry at somebody, you don't, pick up a sword and go after your enemies as you would in the first century world. You pick up a towel and you wash their feet. He's describing a completely counter-cultural revolution and a way of existing in this world. And what that means for you and I, here's the invitation of Jesus. He says, look, I want you to be citizens of this kingdom. That essentially when you became a Christian, when I became a Christian, when you became a Christian, here's what it means. Or if you decide to become a Christian, you can be a citizen of the kingdom of God, that you would begin to read the words of Jesus and begin to try to figure out, how do I live this miraculous kingdom, counterintuitive way of life? Another way to, kind of think about this, or at least in terms of the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus gives the Sermon on the Mount, he's kind of like a president giving an inauguration speech. This is what happens in America, right? When a president gets elected, there's an inauguration. What do? They give a big speech. And at the inaugurational address, what do? They say, these are the values. These are the priorities of my administration. And I know there's a lot of baggage with that metaphor, certainly, but what Jesus is doing at the Sermon on the Mount is he's saying, I am a king, this is my kingdom, and these are the values that I want the people and the citizens of my kingdom to practice. And so as the people of God beginning to turn towards Easter, as the people of God, citizens of this counterintuitive kingdom, we read the words of the New Testament, we read the words of the Sermon on the Mount, and we begin to read this and say, how can we be the kind of people who live this way in this world? If you have a Bible at home, I'm going to encourage you to turn to Matthew chapter 4, verse 23. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. I brought my TV in from home, okay? But I want to put these on the screen because here's the first question that anybody would have. How do I get into the kingdom? You would ask that question about going to a different nation state. You would say, how do I get in? What sort of the value systems of that culture? That's the question. And this is what's so shocking about the words that Jesus shared 2,000 years ago at the Sermon on the Mount. It's not just what he said. It's who he said the Sermon on the Mount to. This is incredible. This is how Matthew is where the story is told. A lot of us have read the Sermon on the Mount, but before you get there, the first or the last few sentences of Matthew chapter 4 tells you who's in the crowd for the Sermon on the Mount. And this is what Matthew says. Jesus went throughout Galilee, which is kind of his hometown, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of what? Of the kingdom. You can say that at home. I know you feel kind of weird right now saying that at home, but he goes throughout preaching and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. This kingdom is at hand. And he's healing every disease and sickness among the people. And it says news about him spread all over Syria. Now, we kind of read over that detail, but the fact that this is leaving Israel, the fact that this is advancing beyond Galilee is incredible. Because that means to the first century audience that's reading this is that people who are not just Hebrew, people who are not just a part of the Jewish tribe, are invited in to this kingdom. They can be a part. And he's healing people. Why is he doing that? We kind of read that and we think it's party tricks that he's doing, turning water into wine. What he's doing is he's bringing anything that he brushes against into alignment with his kingdom. Anybody who's sick, anybody who's not well, he's bringing anything that he brushes against into alignment with the way of God here in this world. And so what you have is people bringing to him, sort of like, Aunt Marie hasn't been feeling too well. Let's get her to Jesus and let's see, he turned water into wine. Let's see what he does with Aunt Marie. They're bringing people from all over the world. People brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. You keep reading. It says large crowds. So for the Sermon on the Mount, there are thousands of people who would be there. And notice who's there. It says from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. Now, Matthew's telling you something pretty interesting here. He's telling you who's in the audience for the Sermon on the Mount. You have people who are from Galilee. That's essentially Nazareth. And people, we kind of read over this. I think there's, an instance in the scriptures where somebody says, Jesus, what good can come from Nazareth? Nazareth was kind of an odd place 2,000 years ago. It was 60 or so miles to the north of Jerusalem. And in our world, that doesn't seem far, but especially in the ancient world, that's very far. And it was an odd place. People who lived there, you just kind of thought, they're just kind of strange. How many of you have ever been to Portland? There's a sticker in Portland that says, keep Portland what? Weird. Keep Portland weird. Yes, and I don't know how this worked 2,000 years ago, but I imagine there's some keep Nazareth weird stickers that were going around. That was sort of the image you had in your head. It was the Portland of its day. That's one group of people who is there in the crowd. And they're there to cheer on the hometown kid. It's sort of like a band that comes from your home state and you find out they're coming to town. You want to go listen to them and you watch them play when they were in high school. That's what this is. This is the hometown guy. They're showing up to hear him. You also have people, it says, from the Decapolis. And that's not a real popular city we talk about. We talk about Nazareth, Jerusalem, but the Decapolis, it's a day's journey away from Jerusalem to the east. And the Decapolis is the Greek word for 10 cities. It was a collection of 10 cities. And it was really a mishmash of people. You had Jewish people there who tried to follow the customs of Judaism. You had Greeks who lived there because they had ruled the world 150 years or so before the Romans did. And the Greeks, with their gods and goddesses and their theater, to the Jewish people, they would be freaks. They would be, how could you live that way? It was abhorrent to the Hebrew culture that there were people who still lived that way in their world. They were polytheistic. They worshiped the gods and the goddesses. Obviously, the Jewish people, monotheistic and worshiping Yahweh. So the Decapolis, the Greek word here would be mishmash. They're just a weird blend of people. And you certainly, if you came from Galilee on this afternoon, would look out and say, what are they doing there? They don't belong in the audience. It says you have people from Jerusalem. If you've been hanging around church for a while, you know who lives in Jerusalem. It's the Pharisees, 5,000 or so Pharisees in the ancient world. They're the stuffy religious elite. They would be offended when they showed up on this particular day, looking out and seeing people from the Decapolis there. It says you also have people from Judea in the crowd. The Judean people, they're sort of the elitist. They're the stuffy. They're religious in their own right. So Matthew's telling you, you have a very strange collection of people in the crowd that day. Here's his point. Anybody can get into the kingdom of God. This is not just for those who know all the answers. This is not just for those who have been to church their whole life. If you are the freak of the week from the Decapolis, you are invited in to experience, to taste and see what this kingdom is all about. You are invited from right where you are to experience what it means to be this miracle that Jesus invites you and for me to be. So maybe you're watching from home today. Maybe you feel kind of good that you don't have to come to church and be sitting around other Christians today because you don't feel like you belong. Maybe you feel like a red brick and a white wall because some things in your past have kept you distant from Christians and people who are spiritual. Jesus says to you, here's the good news. You are invited in to this kingdom. We all are invited in to this kingdom. Now, the question is, what is this kingdom like? What are the values? What are the norms, the social norms of this kingdom? Well, they're all counterintuitive. Jesus says some things that it's strange in our world, but it was certainly strange in the first century world. We'll just take a few snippets of the Sermon on the Mount. Let me give you one. It says this, you are the salt of the earth. This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5:13. He says, you are the salt of the earth. What is salt? I mean, we obviously living in San Diego, the ocean, food, but in the Old Testament world, there's 37 or so uses for salt. One of the uses for salt, and you probably know this, it preserves meat. If meat is going to decay and you place salt on it, it can preserve the shelf life of a particular T-bone. That's one function that salt has. And Jesus is saying, people who are citizens of my kingdom, this is what you do. A neighborhood, for instance, where everybody else moves out because it's decaying, the people of God, citizens of my kingdom, they move in to preserve the thing that is falling apart. Somebody that nobody wants to be around because of bad behavior, whatever it is. They've let the family down, the black sheep. Christians are salt. We go to that person who feels like they are decaying and aching and hurting, and we, as the people of God, are salt. Now, to live that way, that would take a miracle. Exactly. To be that kind of a person, how in the world do you do that? We'll talk about that in just a few moments. Here's some other norms of the kingdom. He says, in terms of, your behavior, your marriage, for 1,000 or so years, this was a law that was on the books. You shall not commit adultery. And Jesus has this sort of line that he uses over and over again where he says, but I tell you, in other words, we're shaking things up a bit. I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, what an impossible, let's be honest, what an impossible standard that he is setting for purity. And here's essentially what he's saying. Look, you know that in terms of your body, if you're married, that you should not violate your integrity and bring your body outside of your marriage. He says, look, I'm telling you, don't do that with your eyes. Don't do that with your heart. You wouldn't do that with your body. Why would you do it with any part of your integrity, any other part of yourself? Don't do it. You go, well, that would take a miracle. Jesus says, exactly. This is the ethic of my kingdom. He says the same thing's true in terms of your speech or in terms of how you treat people. He says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That was a law that was on the books. Let's just be honest for a second. Anybody can do that. I'm really good at that. We can love our friends and people we like, but when it comes to somebody you don't like, when it comes to somebody who annoys you, that's really, really, that's easy to do. But Jesus says, I'm flipping it. There's a new ethic. I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. No way. How in the world are you supposed to do that to somebody who is under your skin and driving you crazy? Jesus says, I tell you, this is how I want you to live. You keep going. Here's another snippet from the Sermon on the Mount. He says, but when you give to the needy, this is bizarre. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So when you give, there's sort of this, like, what is he describing? Really what he's talking about here is your motives. That when you give money away to the needy, and in the ancient world especially, of course you would do that. You take care of the poor, those who are hurting. But Jesus is saying, I want you to do it in a way that your motive is pure. That even your left hand's not suspicious of your right hand. I want you to do it in secret so that you're not doing it just for public display. So everybody says, wow, look at how charitable Ben is. Wow, look at how great you are. That you would do it for the purest of motives. So here's essentially what he's saying. Not only do I want you in my kingdom to have the right kind of behavior, I want you to have the right kind of motives when you do the right kind of behavior, to which you and I would say that would take a miracle. How in the world is anybody supposed to do that? You are getting a clue for how hard this is as you read through this. Let's take a look at another one. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life. Now, obviously, with everything going on, let's just take that one right there. Imagine in a world of anxiety, in a world where everybody is uncertain, what would it look like for you and I as citizens of the kingdom of God to be people who place worry down and pick up peace? To be the kind of people who actually demonstrate this in our world. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, or what you will wear. This one was actually already in the slides before this entire thing in our culture and society, broke out. But just imagine practicing that, being a person who lives that way in our society at any time, let alone this time. Do not be anxious. So these are some of the norms. These are some of the patterns. These are some of the practices that kingdom people do in the world. Now, it's very, very common in our society, and this is kind of bizarre, but people will hear about the resurrection and they'll say, maybe, maybe not. Who knows? There's no video evidence. How in the world do we know that Jesus rose from the dead? That sounds crazy. That sounds far-fetched in an iPhone, Google world. Why does anybody believe that? But it's very, very common, and this is kind of surprising when you actually read through it. People will say, I don't know about this, the resurrection, but the Sermon on the Mount works for me. Everybody should live according to the Sermon on the Mount. It's very, very common that people sort of lift this out or extrapolate this from the scriptures and say, this is the ethic that we need to practice and we need to hold to. And really, if we're honest, what we mean is, I'm not going to do this, but everybody else should do it. If you're honest, as you read through that list, isn't there something in you that says, I wish my husband would do that? I wish my kids would do that. I wish my mother-in-law, who forwards me an email every other 5 minutes, would do that. But when it comes to me, come on, how in the world are we supposed to live that way? Even Gandhi famously said, this ethic of the Sermon on the Mount, whether Jesus is risen from the dead or not, it works for me. It's the most brilliant ethical teaching that has ever been taught on social norms and how people should behave. But the danger is we would lift it away from the resurrection story and not see that it's all sort of part of the same thing. You can't separate it from the resurrection. And if we're really honest, and we kind of keep drilling down on this, as you read through this, as you listen to this, part of you should be offended. Part of you should think, how in the world, who in the world, that is impossible. Several years ago, Virginia Stem Roberts was a professor of literature at Texas A&M University. And she gave it as an assignment to her class at Texas A&M University, and this is in the Bible Belt. She gave as an assignment to her class to read the Sermon on the Mount and offer a critique of it as a piece of literature. They were supposed to be objective, just read it, and then offer thoughts. And there's sort of whether you're a Christian or not, a cultural respect that we have for Jesus. You give it the nice sort of pious response that you know you're supposed to give because we're respectful. But she was shocked as she started to read through the responses that students in her literature class had to this particular essay. This is what one student said in response. One student said, "The stuff the church preaches is extremely strict and allows for almost no fun without thinking it is a sin or not." Go ahead, raise your hands if you've ever had that emotion. Yeah, of course. So this is a response to this Sermon on the Mount that we just read parts of. Student number 2 said this: "I did not like the essay, Sermon on the Mount. It was hard to read and made me feel like I had to be perfect, and no one is." Student number 3 said this as a response: "The things asked in this sermon are absurd. To look at a woman is adultery. That is the most extreme, stupid, unhuman statement that I have ever heard." Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're starting to see, as you read through this, who in the world, how in the world could anybody practice this? Virginia Stem Roberts, as she read through this, eventually came to this conclusion. I love this. "I began to be encouraged. There is something exquisitely innocent about not realizing you shouldn't call Jesus stupid. This was the real thing, a pristine response to the gospel, unfiltered through a 2 millennia cultural haze. I find it strangely heartening that the Bible remains offensive to honest, ignorant ears, just as it was in the first century." Yes, of course, that's the right response. Our tendency, my tendency, and I'm a preacher, so I'm the worst, is to read the Sermon on the Mount and give it a golf clap. Well done, Jesus. Well done. The right response is to say, impossible. Who in the world? How in the world? That in the 21st century, let alone the first century, will not work for anybody. So how do you live this way? How do you possibly begin to step into this kingdom that Jesus invites us to be a part of? Many of you know I have 3 boys. I've got an 8-year-old named Dane. And Dane's lifelong goal is to build airplanes. His goal is one day that, I don't know if it's Boeing, I don't know if maybe part NASA, I don't know what his sort of overarching goal is, but he wants to build airplanes. That's kind of what he's aiming for in life. And he came home the other day, he's in 2nd grade, and he said, "Dad," and I can't even remember what he was learning that day, I think it was cursive. He said, "Dad, why do I have to learn this?" And when it comes to things like cursive, I don't have a great answer. But he says, "Why? Why do I have to learn this?" And I said, "Well, buddy, you're in 2nd grade. This is what you learn when you're in 2nd grade. What else are you going to do?" And he said, "I just want to begin building airplanes now." And as a parent, I mean, you've had those moments where you're trying to explain, this is why you have to do this, and this is why you had to do this. And I was trying to explain to him the process, which wasn't making the conversation much better. You've got to go to 2nd grade, and then 3rd grade, and then 4th grade, and then 5th grade, and then college, and then probably master's degree before somebody's going to hire you to actually build an airplane. You're not just like 3 YouTube videos away from assembling this thing. And as he was sort of processing that, he realized he had to go through this process before he could actually attempt to build the airplane. He had to go to 2nd grade, 3rd grade before he could attempt to build the airplane. Well, here's the good news. Jesus, before he gives us the Sermon on the Mount, he gives us something called the Beatitudes. How many of you have heard of the Beatitudes before? Probably the most famous of the famous, the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are these 8 statements that we kind of read as a preamble to the Sermon on the Mount. And what we typically do is we detach them from the Sermon on the Mount. And we go, well, there's the Beatitudes. And then Jesus said, well, now that that's out of the way, let me get on with the Sermon on the Mount. And they're not intended to be separated. They're intended to go together. And before you and I attempt to live the Sermon on the Mount, we have to first attempt to understand and live the Beatitudes. That if you just go out and try to live the Sermon on the Mount, well, that's like attempting to build an airplane before you've gone to 2nd grade. The Beatitudes are the first, most critical, the steps that you have to take before you go out and try to live this ethic and this way of the kingdom, this miraculous life that Jesus wants you and I to live. If you go out and you just say, I'm not going to be anxious, I'm not going to be anxious, I'm not going to be anxious, but you have not gone through the Beatitudes, well, you are going to be exhausted and beat yourself up when you fail. We first have to live these Beatitudes. And so here's what we're going to do for the next few weeks as a church. We're going to take these Beatitudes one by one because they're steps. There's steps that you take, and we want to take these steps to Easter. And they're sort of a way, an invitation for us to begin to live this miraculous, seemingly impossible way that Jesus invites us to live. And so what I want to do for the next few moments is just share with you a few of the Beatitudes, and then we're going to talk about the first one because it's the first step before we try to apply or live the Sermon on the Mount. These are a few of the Beatitudes. Jesus begins the whole Sermon on the Mount this way. Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And he goes on, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." And if you keep reading in Matthew, there's 4 more of these. We're going to get to those in a few weeks. But I just want to take a look at these because here's our tendency when we read the Beatitudes. We look at these as if they're categories, or we look at them as if they're spiritual gifts. Well, you've got some people who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and some people are poor in spirit. Oh yeah, my grandma, she was so good at being meek, and I'm not very meek. We look at them as if they're categories, but these are really written as steps. There's a sequence to this. And here's kind of the big idea. The first thing you have to do, if you want to be the kind of person who goes in the world and you're not anxious, or you want to be the kind of person who's generous for good motives, the first thing that you have to do is be the kind of person who's poor in spirit. That's step one. Don't attempt to live the Christian life before you first have attempted to be poor in spirit, or you've thought about what does it mean to be poor in spirit. If you go out and you just kind of take the Sermon on the Mount and say, I'm going to go do this, one of 2 things is going to happen, probably both. The first is you are going to be exhausted. You're going to look at your life and your problems and say, I need to not be anxious, and I need to be generous, and I need to be this sort of miraculous person in my family who never seems, fazed by anything that's going on. And you are going to be exhausted trying to live that way. The second thing that's probably going to happen is you're going to accomplish some good, but you're going to do it for all the wrong reasons. It's quite possible to achieve some of the things that Jesus says to do, but you did it for all the wrong reasons. And he starts off first by talking about the condition of your heart, the condition of your spirit. He says, look, be poor in spirit. Be the kind of person who in your spirit, you are poor in spirit. Is it possible to get these verses back up here? Thank you. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So I want to take this first one because this is the first step to living this kingdom kind of life that Jesus wants us to live, this miraculous kind of life. It's the first step in the sequence. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? Well, you could think of it this way. Before you put new wine into an old wineskin, you have to empty out the old wine. If you pour the new wine, the new thing, into the old wine, what's going to happen? This new wine is not going to taste very good, is it? You have to empty out the old wine before it can contain and have this new wine. Jesus is saying, be poor in spirit, be bankrupt, be empty as a person. Empty yourself of all your grit, all your I can do this, all your I'm a really good person and I bet I have a higher IQ than other people, so if I try this, it's going to work, where they failed. Empty yourself so that this new thing, this new creation, this new life can come into you. Another way to explain this, if you and I went to lunch today and sat 6 feet apart, if you and I went to lunch, eventually we would start talking about our challenges in life. We'd start talking about our problems. You would say, I have marriage problems, I have kid problems, I've got single person problems, I've got financial problems. We start talking about our challenges, our issues. And to be a poor in spirit person means that you start to recognize in your life that your biggest problems, they're not financial, they're not marital, they're not kids, they're spiritual problems. It's very easy just to look at your life and to think, you know what, if I had the right therapist, if I had the right spouse, if I had the right amount of money, the right budget, I wouldn't have any problems. And we kind of go through life like a game of whack-a-mole, just thinking if I could just solve that problem, then another one pops up and solve that problem. And now I got to sort of angle my resources to making sure that problem is going to be okay. And what Jesus is trying to get us to is you can solve all those problems. You could spend your entire existence trying to solve all those problems, and you still have a massive spiritual problem. What that means in normal terms is you would still be miserable. You still would have a suffering that is there in the spirit and in the soul, because your big problem and my big problem, it's not financial, it's not marital, although we need help with those things certainly in our life. It's spiritual. There are irreconcilable differences in your soul and in your spirit. And to be a person who's poor in spirit means that you recognize you are completely penniless. You are completely bankrupt in attempting to solve your big spiritual problem. And it means you come to Jesus with an open hand. And you are the kind of person who says, I'm coming to you without any resources to fix my problem. I need you. I'm empty. I have no ability to solve this spiritual problem. I could fix my financial problems. I could fix my marriage problems. I could fix my kid problems. But I cannot fix my spiritual problems. I have nothing to offer. Maybe another way to say it is this. What it means to be poor in spirit. A lot of religions use this metaphor. If you were to stand before God and God was to say to you, what have you done to get into heaven? Tell me why you deserve to be one of those who gets in to heaven. Biblically, it's not going to work that way. But if that scenario played out, if you're anything like me, if you're anything like most people, you would say, well, I've done some good. Yeah, I'm not a perfect person, but you know what? I've been charitable. I've tried to raise my kids in a way that's honorable. I've dated in a way that has been honorable to other people. And I certainly have not been perfect, but I've been a pretty good person. And to be poor in spirit means that you and I come to a place in our heart where we would say, look, God, this is Jared talking. If I'm honest with you, even the good I've done, I probably did it for the wrong reason. My whole life, I'm bankrupt. I'm penniless in being the kind of person who can do any good and do it for the right reason, or solving my problems or fixing things in my life. I'm spiritually being poor in spirit means you come to Christ with a sense of emptiness and saying, I don't really have a whole lot to offer here. And I certainly can't accomplish being the kind of person who lives this miraculous life that you're asking me to live. And so step one, the first question to ask yourself, have you come to Christ in such a way that you say, I have a problem, I have an ache, I have irreconcilable differences that I cannot solve inside of me. I am exhausted in trying to solve all of my problems because my problem is one I cannot solve. It is a spiritual problem at the end of the day. This flies in the face of our culture. A culture that says, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And there's certainly something to that. Get self-help or get help for yourself because you have something inside of you that's good. And all that, to a certain extent, depending on how you look at it, it's true. You should get help. You should read self-help books. All that is fine and good. But this is a way of living that says, on my own, I can't really do anything that I should do because I don't have any resources. Spiritually, I'm bankrupt until I come to Christ. And we come into the presence of Jesus. That's why we do church week after week. We start at step one. I'm poor in spirit today. Maybe you feel that way. Maybe another way to ask this is, does anybody feel exhausted? Does anybody feel a deep sense of wavering in their soul as they look out at the world and they try to raise their kids, or they look at what's going on in the culture today or in society right now and say, I'm exhausted. Maybe you've already felt like you were barely eking out existence. There's enough to worry about, and all of a sudden, coronavirus hits and all of our problems, everything just gets turned upside down again, and it just makes you feel more exhausted. You are a candidate. In that moment, you have become a candidate when you are at the end of your rope for this new miraculous life of the kingdom of God, because you're actually in a place to admit you're poor in spirit. You have no ability to fix what is wrong. You have no reason. You can't play whack-a-mole over, and this one you cannot fix. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you. One theologian, Dallas Willard, says it this way: blessed are the spiritual zeros. Those who have stopped trying to be heroic. Those who have come to that place where they said, I'm out of breath. There's a reason why all the great examples of faith in the scriptures are people who are not heroic in and of themselves, but they are at the end of their rope in and of themselves, going, I don't know what to do. That is the place. Blessed are you when you are weak. Blessed are you when you are out of gas. Blessed are you when you are empty and you are poor in spirit. That is the moment you are a candidate to live this miraculous life. Step one to being the miracle. Let's pray together. God, we thank you in this room, all across the city today, that we do not have to be in the same location to be spiritually connected. And we certainly don't have to be with anybody else right now to admit that we are poor in spirit. Maybe individually, maybe corporately, maybe as a family, there is a sense of exhaustion. There's a sense I am at the end of my rope. Maybe as a mom right now, uncertain how to go to work and stay at home with your kids. Maybe as a somebody trading stocks, you're looking at this going, I don't quite know what to do or how this is going to work out. Maybe you're nervous with your job and family. How is all this going to pan out? Maybe just with your own health. There's a sense of anxiety. Maybe in your marriage right now, there's a huge sense of exhaustion. Blessed are those who admit they have no resources to solve their problems. Blessed are those who are at the end of their rope, for theirs is the kingdom of God. God, before we try to attempt not being anxious, before we try to attempt being the kind of people who go throughout the world loving our enemies and praying for those who persecute us, would we start with step one today as a church, being poor in spirit? For somebody within the sound of my voice who's exhausted, and they're trying to not be anxious, they're trying to love their enemy and forgive, would they return to the first thing you said? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. In Jesus' name we pray. And all of God's children said, Amen. Grace and peace.
Well, hey everyone, I'm Nate, one of the pastors here at the church, and I just want to thank Jared for kicking off our new series, 8 Steps to a Miracle. Well, we hope you are safe and healthy in the comfort of your own home, and we miss you. We miss you here at church, but we are grateful for technology that allows us to still do church. Well, I think it's obvious that we are in uncertain times, but it's how we live out our faith during these uncertain times that demonstrates our love for Jesus, and how we're loving those who are hurting and broken, how we are supporting those who are most vulnerable. And so we just want to invite you to take a next step with us in this season from a place of hope and prayer. And although we might be socially disconnected at this time, meeting all across the city, we are spiritually one. We are spiritually together. And one of the ways to live that out is to take communion. And so we are going to do that today. And so we're going to sing a worship song at the end of the service today. You can grab the cup, grab the bread at that time and take communion, or maybe you'll do it later in your day. But the significance of communion isn't just about the death of Jesus. It's also about his resurrection. Because death without resurrection is just death, and there's really no hope in that. Imagine what Jesus' followers and his friends were feeling when he went to the cross. utter hopelessness, depression, anxiety, uncertainty. It was only through his resurrection that they found hope again, that they found new life. And so as we take communion today, as we take the elements, let's remember that our hope isn't in this world or whatever disease is going on. It's in Jesus. It's ultimately in Jesus. And so this bread, this represents the body of Jesus that was broken for us, but also that gives us new life. Let's take the bread together. And then this cup represents Jesus' blood, which was shed for us, but also gave us new life. Let's take the cup together now. God, we just thank you for what you did on that cross and what you did through your resurrection. You gave us hope. You give us peace, even in uncertain times. And so, God, help us to trust you, help us to lean into you and be good neighbors and continue to love those in our city. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, stay tuned. We're going to keep you updated on all the things happening inside this church and all the ways that we can be good neighbors in our city. We're getting all kinds of phone calls and requests on meeting needs in our city. There's one thing that we can all do now, though, and that's give. Give financially. When we do that, we're telling our minds and our hearts that our hope is in Jesus. And so if you want to give, it's really easy. You just go to the Give tab on the website, and there's a bunch of different ways you can give from there. Church, thanks so much for tuning in today, and let's continue to worship together.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope and you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You give life, oh you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope and you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only.
your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Oh, nothing compares
Thank you for doing church with us at home today. We're going to continue to communicate with you all week, share content with you, and we can't wait to worship with you next Sunday. Same times, 8:30, 10, and 11:30. We pray that you have a safe and a healthy week, and we can't wait to see you next weekend. Go in peace.